When my wife, Margaret, passed away last winter, I thought grief would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part came a week later, in my brother's law office, when my daughter looked me in the eye and told me to disappear. Her name is Lydia. She's 33, sharp, confident, too much like her mother for her own good. She and her husband, Evan, sat across from me while the lawyer read the will. Margaret had built a small empire from her tech company, patents, stocks, and real estate, worth $33 million. When the reading ended, the lawyer said my name only once, in the section about sentimental items. No money. No property. Just his personal effects. Lydia didn't even look at me. She said, "Dad, Mom wanted me to handle things now. Maybe it's time you found your own place." Then she smiled, polite, rehearsed, and turned to Evan. That was the moment I knew I'd lost not only my wife, but my family. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever lost someone you love, only to realize the living can hurt you even more. That evening, I packed a single duffel bag, just the essentials. A few shirts, my old watch, the worn leather wallet Margaret gave me on our 10th anniversary. The house was too big without her anyway. Still, walking out felt like stepping off a cliff. As I closed the door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. 68 years old. Retired teacher. A man who had spent his life fixing broken things, desks, fences, hearts. But now I couldn't fix this. I drove my old pickup to the cheapest motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where nobody asks your name, and every room smells faintly of bleach and regret. I sat on the bed, staring at the yellowed ceiling, trying to understand what Margaret had done. Why had she left me out completely? Why had she trusted Lydia, a woman who hadn't visited once during her mother's illness, with everything? My phone buzzed. A text from Lydia. "I'll have someone deliver your personal belongings next week. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder? I almost laughed. She had no idea what hard was. The next morning, I went for a walk through town. I ended up outside the old family shop, Benson Woodworks. My father started it in 1957, and I'd run it until arthritis started biting at my fingers. The front window was dusty, the closed sign faded, but the tools were still inside, the lathe, the saws, even the wooden clock Margaret and I built together the year we married. That clock had stopped ticking the night she died. I unlocked the back door with the spare key hidden under a loose brick. Inside, the silence was heavy but comforting, the kind of silence filled with ghosts who mean you no harm. I brushed off the workbench and sat down. My hands still remembered the weight of wood, the way oak yields slowly under steady pressure. I opened a drawer and found something I hadn't seen in years, a small wooden box with a brass latch. Inside were 3 flash drives, each labeled in Margaret's handwriting, Formula A, Formula B, Formula C. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. These were from the early days of her research, before the company took off. She used to joke that those drives were her second brain. I remembered her telling me, once, half asleep after a long night in the lab, "If anything ever happens to me, make sure the right people get my data. Not the ones who just want to sell it." At the time, I'd laughed it off. But now, sitting in that dusty shop, her words echoed like prophecy. Lydia didn't care about science. She cared about luxury cars and Instagram posts. Evan cared about brand expansion. If they had these drives, they'd sell her work to the highest bidder before her grave was cold. And that's when the idea hit me, quiet, simple, complete. They had inherited the money. But I had inherited the truth. The formulas, the prototypes, the original designs, all stored in this tiny wooden box. Without them, Margaret's company was just a name. Without me, Lydia couldn't touch her mother's greatest creation. I slipped the box into my bag. When I stepped outside, the morning sun cut through the fog, and for the first time in weeks, I felt alive. I wasn't running away, I was protecting something. That night, I booked a bus ticket north under a different name. Destination, Portland, Maine, the last place Margaret and I had visited together before her diagnosis. As the bus pulled out of the station, I watched the lights of my hometown fade behind me. Lydia wanted me to disappear. Fine. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The road north stretched endless and gray beneath the bus tires, a blur of small towns and gas stations. Outside the window, winter had begun to thaw, patches of old snow clung stubbornly to the edges of fields. Inside, the hum of the engine and the soft murmur of strangers filled the silence that had become my only companion. Somewhere between Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, I opened the wooden box again. The flash drives were still there, along with a folded sheet of paper I hadn't noticed before. Margaret's handwriting, precise, looping, unmistakable, covered both sides. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back to the lab. Lydia loves control, but she doesn't understand responsibility. Evan knows business, but not integrity. I built my work on both. These drives contain my real legacy, not money, not patents, but the foundation of something I called Project Haven. It's a formula that could revolutionize energy storage, cheap, safe, renewable. But it's incomplete. The key is missing. And you're the only one who knows where it is. I frowned. The key? She couldn't mean. I dug deeper into the box and found a small brass key, taped to the bottom. My heart sank as I realized where it belonged, the workshop clock. The same clock Margaret and I built together 40 years ago. The clock that stopped ticking the night she died. By the time I reached Portland, a storm had rolled in off the Atlantic. The ocean was a slab of black glass, waves breaking against the pier with quiet fury. I rented a small room above a diner, the kind that smelled like coffee and salt. The woman behind the counter, Martha, handed me a set of keys and said, "Room 6, end of the hall. The heater's moody, but it works if you talk nice to it." I managed a small smile. "Thanks. I've dealt with worse." Over the next few days, I settled into a rhythm. Morning walks by the pier, afternoons spent in the corner booth of the diner, tinkering with old sketches of Margaret's designs. I bought a cheap laptop and an adapter to read the flash drives. Inside them were hundreds of files, formulas, test results, and video logs of Margaret speaking directly to the camera. Her voice hit me like a punch to the chest. Day 412. Results inconclusive. If the polymer holds, this could change everything. Arthur still doesn't understand why I'm obsessed, but one day, he will. Another clip. Day 498. Lydia came by today. She doesn't care about the science, she asked how much the patent could be worth if commercialized. I told her it wasn't ready. She laughed and said, "Then maybe it never will be." I think I saw who she's becoming, and it scared me. I paused the video. My throat tightened. Margaret had seen it all coming, the greed, the arrogance, the emptiness. But she'd also seen me. The man she trusted not to sell out her life's work. One afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, Lydia's voice sliced through the static. "Dad, where the hell are you?" I said nothing. "Don't hang up. I know you took something from the shop." Evan checked the inventory list. 3 encrypted drives, all missing. "You think I wouldn't notice?" Her voice cracked. "You can't just steal Mom's work." "She didn't leave it to you," I said quietly. "Not the part that mattered." There was a pause, then laughter, brittle and sharp. "Oh, come on. What, you think she left her genius to a man who still uses a flip phone? Be serious." "I'm more serious than I've ever been," I replied. "Fine," she snapped. "Keep your little souvenirs. You can't read the files anyway. They're encrypted. Evan will have our lawyers handle it." Enjoy your retirement, Dad. Wherever you are. The line went dead. I sat in silence for a long time, watching the rain slide down the window. She was wrong, about the files, about me, about everything. Margaret hadn't built this for Lydia to sell or Evan to exploit. She'd built it for the world. And she'd trusted me to make sure it reached the right hands. 2 weeks later, I found out who those right hands might be. At the diner, I overheard 2 engineers from a local university talking about renewable energy storage. Their research had stalled due to lack of funding. I introduced myself, careful not to reveal too much. I told them I'd once worked with someone who'd been developing a polymer-based battery. One of them, Dr. Kevin Marsh, leaned forward. Polymer-based? As in flexible state energy retention? I nodded. Something like that. He whistled softly. If that works, it could cut manufacturing costs by 70%. Do you have schematics? Maybe, I said. But I need to trust who I'm dealing with. We met again the next day in a campus lab. The place smelled like acetone and ambition. I showed them a few fragments of Margaret's early notes, just enough to prove I wasn't bluffing. Their eyes widened. This could be revolutionary, Kevin whispered. But we'd need funding. Proper testing. Security. I might be able to help with that too, I said. Because what Lydia didn't know, what no one knew, was that Margaret and I shared more than a marriage. We shared a joint account in a small credit union, untouched for decades, meant for emergencies. It wasn't much by her company's standards, about $220,000, but it was enough to get something started. Enough to build Haven the right way. Meanwhile, Lydia and Evan were burning through the inheritance at light speed. New house in Aspen. Private jets. A gallery opening that cost more than most people's homes. But greed has a short shelf life. I began receiving emails from old friends back home. Saw the news, one of them wrote. Your daughter's company's stock just tanked. Lawsuits incoming. Something about data ownership. I smiled faintly. Lydia had gone public with her new line of innovations, and the investors wanted proof of intellectual property. Proof she didn't have. Because that proof, the formulas, the original research, the encryption key, was sitting right here with me, inside a wooden box in a motel room above the sea. She wanted me to disappear. I had. But I had taken something with me, something far more powerful than money. Her mother's soul. And soon, the world would know whose hands it truly belonged in. The first prototype didn't look like much, a thin, flexible sheet that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights of the lab. Kevin and his colleague, Dr. Patel, watched as I carefully connected it to a small LED bulb. The light flickered, sputtered, then steadied into a soft, constant glow. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the generator. Then Patel exhaled slowly. It's stable. Holy hell, it's stable. Kevin turned to me, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Benson, this isn't just energy storage. This is energy liberation. I smiled faintly. That's what my wife wanted. Over the following weeks, the 3 of us worked in secret. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. They thought I was just the widow of a forgotten scientist, trying to finish what she started. That was true enough. But the full scope, the billion-dollar implications, had to stay hidden until I knew we could protect it. I rented a small warehouse outside the city under a false name. We built a clean workspace there, stocked with supplies I ordered using the credit union funds. I kept Margaret's drives locked inside a safe bolted to the floor. Only I had the key. At night, after the younger men left, I'd sit by myself, running my fingers over the prototype and talking to Margaret as if she were still beside me. You were right, Ellie, I'd whisper. You always said science was just art that remembered its purpose. Meanwhile, Lydia's life was unraveling like a loose thread. I didn't need to look for updates, they found me. The business news channels, online forums, even morning radio were all buzzing about Lydian Technologies, the company she'd renamed after herself. SEC launches investigation into Lydian Technologies for data irregularities. CEO's husband under scrutiny for insider trading. Shares plummet amid questions of missing intellectual property. Evan had tried to pitch Margaret's lost work as a continuation of his wife's research, but he didn't have the data to back it up. The company's board turned on them. Investors withdrew. Lawsuits piled up like snowdrifts. One article featured a photo of Lydia outside a courthouse, expensive sunglasses hiding her face, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. All I felt was tired. Greed had taken my daughter long before money did. Then one evening, just before midnight, I got a call. A familiar voice, soft but unsteady. Dad. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Dad, it's me. Lydia. I didn't answer right away. I know you're angry, she said quickly. You have every right to be. But I need your help. Please. The lawyers are tearing everything apart. They're saying Mom's files are missing, that without them, her patents are worthless. Evan's panicking. He wants me to sell the house to cover legal fees. I can't, I don't know what to do. There was a pause, a sound halfway between guilt and fear. Did you take them? She asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I said. And I'm not giving them back. Her breath hitched. Dad, please, it's all we have left. No, I said. It's all your mother had left. And you buried it under greed. She started to cry. Not loud, but quietly, like a child who'd finally run out of excuses. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I thought I was doing what she would have wanted. I closed my eyes. If you really believe that, you never knew her. Then I ended the call. 3 days later, the news hit the front page of every major outlet. Whistleblower reveals cover-up in Lydian Technologies collapse. Someone inside the company had leaked emails between Evan and a private investor, showing they'd fabricated test results and falsified patents. The Department of Justice got involved. Evan was arrested. Lydia disappeared from the public eye overnight. The world moved on. But I didn't. Because Margaret's project, Project Haven, was more than just technology. It was potential. And potential was fragile. Kevin and Patel had started to talk about bringing in outside investors, maybe filing patents under their names. They weren't malicious, just ambitious. But ambition is just greed wearing a cleaner suit. I had to act before it consumed them too. The next morning, I visited the university and left a sealed envelope for Kevin. Inside was a note and a check for the remaining balance of my savings. You've done great work. Now rest. The project isn't ready for the world, not yet. When it is, you'll understand why. Then I packed my things, locked the lab, and drove north again. I didn't know where I was going, only that it had to be quiet. Somewhere along the Maine coast, I found a cabin for sale, cheap, remote, half-finished. It overlooked a narrow bay where the water turned silver in the mornings. I bought it under a false name. That night, I set the old wooden clock on the mantel. I hadn't opened its back since the day Margaret died. My hands trembled as I inserted the tiny brass key and turned it. The gears clicked once. Twice. Then began to move. A hidden compartment at the base popped open, revealing a small handwritten notebook, Margaret's final journal. I flipped through the pages, her neat handwriting fading into hurried scrawl near the end. Arthur, if you find this, it means Lydia couldn't be saved from herself. I tried to build a bridge between what she wanted and what the world needed. But bridges burn easily when built on pride. I'm sorry for the pain you'll carry. But if you're reading this, then at least you're still here. That's enough. I sat there for a long time, the sound of the ticking clock filling the cabin. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running. I was right where she wanted me to be, at the edge of the world, holding the last piece of her genius and the proof that her love hadn't been erased by a will or a number on a check. By spring, Kevin reached out again. The email was short. We ran your formula. It works. Clean, stable, efficient. We'll credit the foundation in her name, as you asked. Foundation. I liked the sound of that. Not revenge. Not retribution. Just renewal. Margaret's work was alive, and so was I. And if Lydia ever found me, I decided, I wouldn't slam the door. But I wouldn't hand her the key either. Because some lessons you have to learn in the dark before you can see the light again. The summer that followed was the quietest I'd ever known. Mornings smelled of pine and sea salt, the afternoons hummed with the drone of bees moving through wildflowers that grew near the porch. I woke early, worked with my hands, and spent the evenings by the fire reading Margaret's journal. There was peace in repetition: chop wood, brew coffee, fix what's broken. After the chaos, it felt like therapy disguised as routine. But there was also an emptiness that even peace couldn't fill. I missed her voice. Her laughter. The way she'd scribble formulas on napkins, as if the laws of physics were too impatient to wait for paper. One night in late July, I sat by the open window, the notebook spread out before me. The moonlight made the ink shimmer faintly, and for the first time, I noticed something at the bottom of a page I'd somehow overlooked, a set of coordinates, followed by 2 words, final stage. I grabbed an old atlas and traced the numbers. The spot was less than 30 miles from where I was sitting, an abandoned hydroelectric station near the Kennebec River. Margaret had worked on energy storage, maybe she'd done something there before she died. The next morning, I packed a small bag, took the truck, and drove out. The road twisted through dense forest before opening onto a clearing. The hydro plant stood silent, a skeleton of rusted metal and concrete, half swallowed by vines. Inside, the air was thick with dust and history. I followed the faint echo of dripping water until I reached what looked like a sealed lab, a glass-walled room behind a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The lock was old, but the hinges surrendered easily to a crowbar. Inside, I found exactly what I didn't expect: machines still running. A low hum filled the space, coming from a single workstation powered by a solar generator rigged through the window. On the table, a monitor glowed faintly. The desktop wallpaper was a photo of Margaret, younger, her hair pulled back, smiling. A message flickered across the screen. If you're reading this, Arthur, you found haven. My knees nearly gave out. I sank into the chair and pressed play on the only video file. Margaret's face appeared, tired but determined. I knew you'd come, she said softly. You never could leave things unfinished. Haven isn't just a formula anymore, Art. It's real. It's here. This station is running entirely on the prototype, the first fully stable energy loop. Self-sustaining, renewable, infinite. She smiled. I couldn't announce it yet. Not with Lydia circling the company like a hawk. So I hid it here, under a different name. I built the skeleton of a foundation, in both senses. Financial and literal. You'll find the papers in the cabinet beside you. Finish what I started. But please, don't let greed find it first. The screen went black. For a long while, I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. The old man looking back at me didn't seem like someone who could carry that kind of legacy. But Margaret had believed I could. I opened the cabinet. Inside were 2 binders labeled Haven Research Trust and Foundation Registration. Everything was there: bank information, prototype details, even her signed statement transferring all intellectual property to the trustee of Haven, Arthur Benson. My throat tightened. She'd prepared it all. Even after death, Margaret had outsmarted everyone. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet determination. I shut down the visible parts of the station, moved the active hardware to a smaller shed closer to my cabin, and restructured the trust into a registered nonprofit, the Haven Foundation for Renewable Science and Craftsmanship. It sounded official. It was official. Kevin and Patel agreed to join as researchers under non-disclosure agreements. Together, we refined the prototype, scaled it down, made it safer. Every success felt like a heartbeat from the past. But peace never lasts long when greed has your name on its map. In September, I got an email from a blocked address. "You're not as hard to find as you think, Dad. We need to talk. Lydia." I didn't answer. A week later, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. A black Mercedes was parked outside the cabin. Lydia stepped out wearing a raincoat that cost more than my truck. Her face looked older, sharper somehow, like life had sanded off the last of her softness. She stood there, half-soaked, waiting for me to open the door. I didn't make her wait long. "You found me," I said. She smiled faintly. "You didn't make it easy." "I wasn't trying to." We sat at the kitchen table. I poured her coffee. She didn't drink it. "I know what Mom built," she said finally. "The investigators traced the patents. They say you've registered something called Haven." I nodded. "That's right. I want to see it." "No." Her jaw tightened. "Dad, you can't just hide technology that could change the world. That's not what Mom would have wanted." I stared at her. "You don't get to speak for her anymore." That hit her harder than I expected. She looked away, blinking fast. "I made mistakes," she said quietly. "I was stupid. Evan, he used me, and when everything fell apart, I deserved it. But Mom wouldn't have wanted me cut out completely. She would have given me a chance to make it right." I leaned back. "Maybe she already did." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "She left you the fortune, Lydia. She left me the work. Maybe that was her way of seeing who we'd become." We sat in silence for a long time. The rain tapped against the roof like a clock counting down a choice. Finally, she whispered, "Can I help?" I wanted to say no. Every instinct told me to protect Haven from her. But there was something in her voice, not the sharpness of greed, but the tremor of humility. So I said, "Maybe. But if you're serious, you start here. No lawyers. No headlines. You clean glassware. You take notes. You listen. That's it." She nodded slowly. "All right." And so she stayed. The first few weeks were awkward. She didn't know how to use half the tools, spilled chemicals twice, and complained about the cold. But then, one morning, I found her in the shed before dawn, hunched over a microscope, taking notes with a focus that reminded me of her mother. She looked up, caught me watching, and smiled shyly. "I get it now," she said. What she meant by building something real. I didn't answer. But for the first time, I believed she might mean it. By November, Haven was stable enough to power 3 homes for 6 months without interruption. Kevin and Patel were preparing a presentation for the Department of Energy. Lydia wanted to help, but I told her she wasn't ready yet. Still, I could see the change. She no longer talked about investors or markets. She talked about applications, villages, schools, families without light. Margaret had wanted to save humanity from itself. Maybe her daughter could still be part of that. Every evening, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the generator hum in the distance, and whisper to the night, "You did it, Ellie. You saved us all, in your own way." And I hoped, wherever she was smiling. By December, the first snow had blanketed the trees, softening every edge of the world. From the window of my cabin, the frozen bay looked like glass, still, perfect, and deceptively strong. Lydia had taken to waking up early to record field data, her breath visible in the cold as she scribbled on her clipboard. She had changed, or at least, she was trying to. The arrogance that used to radiate off her had been replaced by something humbler, quieter. She didn't ask about money anymore. She asked about meaning. Still, I couldn't forget the words she once said to me, "Find somewhere else to die." They echoed every time I saw her face. But grief does strange things to people. It can twist love into ambition and regret into anger. Maybe she was untwisting again. That morning, Kevin and Patel arrived with good news. "We've got the Department of Energy presentation date," Kevin said, setting his gloves on the table. "January 12th. D.C. Lydia's eyes widened. "They actually want to see it?" Patel grinned. "They want to fund it. Preliminary grant of $1.8 million if the demo works." The number didn't impress me much anymore. Money had already destroyed too much. But the idea that the government wanted to fund Margaret's dream? That mattered. "We'll need to transport the prototype," I said. "And I'll need to review the security specs. No corporate sponsorships. No leaks." Kevin nodded. "Understood. You've got final say." Lydia hesitated. "Dad, if this goes public, it'll have my name attached, won't it?" I studied her. "Do you want it to?" She exhaled. "No. I just want people to know it was hers. Mom's." That was the first time I believed her completely. The holidays came and went quietly. No decorations, no fanfare, just work. On Christmas Eve, Lydia brought a small tree, barely 4 feet tall, and set it by the window. She hung a single ornament on it, one of Margaret's old glass pendants from her lab. When she plugged it in, the pendant caught the light and filled the room with faint blue reflections, like frozen fire. "Mom used to say this was her favorite color," Lydia whispered. I nodded. She said it reminded her of balance, not too warm, not too cold. For a long moment, we just stood there. Not father and daughter divided by betrayal, but two survivors of the same storm, trying to rebuild. But peace never travels alone. It brings its shadow, the echo of what could still go wrong. The first sign came on New Year's Day. A black SUV parked at the end of the long dirt road leading to the cabin. It didn't move for hours. When I finally went out to check, it was gone. The next morning, I found fresh footprints near the shed where we kept Haven's prototype. Lydia noticed my tension. "You think someone's following us?" "I think greed has long legs," I said. That evening, I installed a small surveillance system around the property, motion sensors, cameras, floodlights. The kind of protection Margaret never had time to think about. 2 nights later, the cameras caught what I feared most, Evan. He was thinner, harder, wearing a black coat and a look of desperation. He stood outside the gate at midnight, staring toward the cabin. Lydia froze when she saw the footage. "He found us," she whispered. "How?" "Probably followed the patents," I said quietly. "You can trace anything if you know where to look." She covered her mouth, shaking. "Dad, you don't understand, he's dangerous. When everything fell apart, he blamed me. Said I cost him his future. I think he's lost it." I looked out into the snow, at the faint tire tracks leading away from the property. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't get close again." But Evan wasn't the kind of man who stopped when he was told to. 3 days later, the break-in came. It was a little after 2 in the morning. The alarms blared, motion detected in the lab shed. I grabbed my coat, rushed outside, and saw a shadow moving inside the glass walls. The floodlight flickered on. Evan stood there, wild-eyed, holding the prototype's containment case in his hands. "Put it down," I said, stepping into the doorway. He turned sharply, his face pale in the cold light. "You think you can just erase me, old man? You and your wife stole everything. That project was mine too, I helped fund it through Lydian Technologies. I deserve my share." "You deserve prison," I said evenly. "And if you touch that case, you'll get something worse." He laughed, a raw, broken sound. "You wouldn't call the cops. You're too noble for that. Try me." Lydia appeared behind me, her voice trembling. "Evan, please. This isn't who you are." He looked at her, something snapping behind his eyes. "No, Lydia. This is exactly who I am. The man your mother-in-law cut out of her empire. The man your father replaced me with." He took a step closer. The prototype gleamed faintly in his arms, fragile, volatile, priceless. I raised my hand. "Evan, listen to me. That device isn't just dangerous, it's alive. It needs balance. You drop it, it's gone forever." For a moment, the only sound was wind howling through the trees. Then Lydia spoke, her voice breaking. "You already lost me once, Evan. Don't lose yourself too." Something in him flickered, hesitation, guilt, maybe memory. Then he dropped the case. It hit the floor and cracked. A thin trail of blue energy hissed from the fracture, like gas escaping under pressure. I lunged forward, grabbed the unit, and slammed the emergency seal shut before it could vent. The lights flickered, then steadied. The hum returned. Haven was safe. Evan wasn't. He stumbled backward, fell against the workbench, and slid to the floor. Not dead, just broken. His voice was hoarse. "She left it all to you, didn't she? Even her love?" I didn't answer. By dawn, the sheriff had him in custody. Lydia gave her statement in silence. When it was over, she turned to me and whispered, "He would have destroyed everything." "No," I said softly. "He just reminded us why it has to be protected." In the weeks that followed, Lydia threw herself into the work. She barely slept, spending long nights recalibrating the prototype, determined to fix the damage from the break-in. It was her way of atoning. And maybe, in her own way, she did. By mid-January, the system was stable again. The Department of Energy review went forward as planned. Kevin and Patel presented remotely from D.C., while Lydia and I monitored the live data from the cabin. When the test concluded, a green check mark appeared on the screen, "Successful demonstration." Lydia covered her mouth and started to cry, not the shallow tears of guilt, but the deep ones that come from release. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud." She nodded. "I hope she forgives me." "She already has," I said. "That's what Haven means, rebirth." Outside, snow was falling again, quiet, steady, endless. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man hiding from his past. I felt like a man living inside his wife's final wish. And for me, that was enough. 2 days after the DOE demo, our inboxes turned into sirens. Kevin forwarded a formal notice of intent to award $1-800-000 over 18 months, contingent on lab safety certification and IP clarity by March 1. The science was solid. The paperwork would be war. At 6:12 a.m., Patel texted a link to a business blog. Lydian Technologies claims prior interest in Haven thermal platform. The article quoted a source familiar with the founders, alleging that the prototype derived from exploratory work done under Lydian's umbrella. Evan's fingerprints were all over it, even from a holding cell. Within hours, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the cabin, a temporary restraining order request to freeze further development pending a hearing in Duluth on January 28. Lydia stared at the first page, color draining from her face. He's trying to own Mom's work with a press release and a judge. Press releases don't beat paper, I said. But judges do. So we bring better paper. I pulled the gray archival box from the top shelf of the bookcase, the one with Margaret's neat label, Haven, Chain of Custody. I'd taken it the night Claire told me to disappear, when I left with more than memories. Inside lay three things: Margaret's lab notebooks, numbered 0109, a thumb drive with secure hashes for each page scan, and a signed, notarized IP assignment dated May 14, 2021, transferring all Haven-related inventions to a small non-profit Margaret had quietly formed, the Harbor Trust. She had listed trustees by hand: Arthur, Chair; Patel, Technical; Kevin, Community. Lydia's name wasn't there, not as punishment, but because in 2021 she was still orbiting Evan. We register the assignment, I said. We file the scans, the timestamps, the witnesses, the gel photos, the purchase receipts for every thermocouple we ever bought from DG Key. And we put the trust between Haven and every hungry mouth. Lydia touched the cover of Notebook 03 as if it might sting. She prepared this before, everything. She knew the storms before we felt the wind. We drove through powdery snow to a one-room office in town where Megan, a paralegal who worked for Patel's cousin, ran a scanner like a violinist. Page by page, 9 notebooks became PDFs with SHA 256 checksums printed on the footer. Receipts from 2019, $482. 11 for nichrome wire, $1,276. 40 for insulation board, were stapled and stamped. Margaret had left me a treasury and a trail. By evening, Kevin had converted the trust from dormant to active with the state, and Patel had filed an ex parte response attaching the assignment. The clerk scheduled arguments for the 28th at 9 a.m. Paper versus noise, Kevin said on speaker. I like our odds. Noise got louder. The next morning, a Twin Cities anchor led with attempted tech theft in the North Woods, security stills of Evan at our shed blurred against the snow. A second segment ran at noon, Lydian tech distances itself from former CFO as IP spat deepens. Investors hated mess, Evan's board placed him on leave by 3 p.m. He was on the news, but not the way he'd planned. I didn't gloat. Greed is a mirror, stare too long and you memorize your own worst angles. The DOE meanwhile pushed for a transition plan. Haven needed a certified facility. Dar. Santos at the University of Minnesota offered space in a decommissioned battery lab in St. Paul, Building E, Room 214. The lease, $3,200 per month, starting February 1st, contingent on liability coverage. The trust could pay it once the award hit. That night over soup and cornbread, Lydia cleared her throat. If the trust becomes the owner, what's my place in it, if any? You tell me. She stared at the steam. I don't want a title. I want a job. Entry level. Data, inventory, coffee. Whatever needs doing. 3 conditions, I said. 1. No social media about Haven. 2. You sign the same volunteer agreement as everyone else. 3. On March 1st, you stand in front of a camera and tell the truth about the night you told me to disappear, and why you were wrong. She swallowed, eyes wet. I will. January 28th arrived mean and bright. The courthouse was an old brick building with radiators that hissed like tired snakes. On our side, Kevin in a navy suit, Patel in a sweater over a collared shirt, and me in my only blazer. On theirs, a Minneapolis partner with cufflinks and a winter tan. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a librarian's calm, listened without blinking. Lydian's counsel argued corporate opportunity and anticipatory breach. Kevin rose with the chain of custody box like a communion offering. He walked the court through dated notebooks, email printouts, notarized assignment, UPS tracking logs from when Margaret shipped samples to Patel's old lab in 2020. Then he placed the kicker on the lectern, an internal Lydian email Evan had sent Lydia on March 7, 2022, we should steer clear of your mother's stuff, too much risk if she's assigned it to a trust. He had known. The judge exhaled, a sound like a page turning. Temporary restraining order denied. Parties are free to litigate merits, but there is no immediate showing that plaintiff owns the IP. Defendant's documentation is unusually thorough. Outside, Salt's trucks scraped the street. Lydia hugged the gray box like a rescued dog. We didn't celebrate, we packed. By February 3rd, Haven lived in room 214, fresh safety signage, a lockbox bolted to the floor, the prototype humming under its clear shield. The university issued us badges. Our little team expanded by 3, Maya, materials science, 26, brilliant, eats almonds like oxygen, Ty, former Navy electrician, 34, measures twice, cuts once, and Ben, grad student, 24, the kind who starts sentences with, I plotted this at 2 a.m. Everyone signed the trust's charter with the same cheap black pen. Section 1. One of that charter became our North Star. Harbor Trust shall hold Haven in the public interest. Any license must, a. remain non-exclusive, b. cap end-user margins, c. require a community dividend no less than 3% of pre-tax profit to fund local weatherization and workforce training, and, d. prohibit deployment where it enables displacement or predatory lending. All departures require unanimous trustee consent. Lawyers would call it messy. Margaret called it moral math. The media found us anyway. Reporters called. Venture capitalists sent congrats emails with term sheets attached like flowers with thorns. We answered none of them. Instead, we wrote a 2-page public note and posted it on a bare-bones site Kevin spun up. Haven is a commons. We will license non-exclusively to manufacturers who agree to the 4-point covenant above. No bids. No exclusivity. No hype. Harbor Trust, February 6th. My phone lit until the battery died. 10 inquiries vanished. 3 serious ones remained, a co-op in Wisconsin, a tribal enterprise in Arizona, and a mid-sized HVAC manufacturer in Ohio that still made things in Toledo. We invited all 3 to St. Paul for a tour on the 15th. No branding. No sizzle reels. Just a device in a room and a covenant on a wall. The night before the tours, Lydia found me in the empty lab. She set 2 mugs on the stainless bench. I wrote the statement for March 1st, she said. Want to hear it? No. I want to hear it when it costs you something. She nodded, accepting the sting as fair. Then, can I say something else? I nodded. I thought love was what you keep. Mom thought love was what you give away and still have. I didn't understand the second kind until you disappeared. And until you didn't disappear, you built a place for me to find you again. Thank you. I stared at the humming shield. Don't thank me yet. We still have to pick partners who will keep promises when no one's watching. We met the co-op at 9 a.m. They arrived in flannel and worn boots, asking about service intervals and who pays when a heat exchanger fails in month 37. The tribal enterprise joined at noon, their director insisting on training local installers, revenue sharing with elders' councils, and women-led apprenticeships. The Ohio firm came last. Their CEO ran a finger across the bench to check dust and asked a question I liked: what breaks when this scales to 10,000 units, and can we build the fix before it breaks? By dinner time, I could hear Margaret in the room, clear as the hum. This is what she built for: competence, fairness, hands. On February 18th, an email arrived from Lydian's counsel, settlement proposal. They offered to withdraw all claims with prejudice, if we granted them a 5-year exclusive in North America with first right elsewhere and a 10% royalty to the trust. It was a clever trap dressed as peace. I forwarded it to the trustees with a single line: decline, publish. Kevin posted our answer as a footnote to the Haven is a Commons page. Update: February 18th. We declined an exclusivity proposal. Haven will remain a non-exclusive, covenant-bound platform. The phone went quiet. Good. Let the wrong people self-select out. On February 27, the grant agreement hit my inbox, 12 pages, government fonts, spaces for signatures. I printed 2 copies, brought them to room 214, and set them beside the old gray box. Lydia stood across from me, hands clasped. Before we sign, I said, we need to settle one more thing. She waited. In May 2021, your mother left instructions. If Haven made daylight, the trust would publish the open measurements, the non-proprietary performance data, so small shops could build to spec without paying a gatekeeper. The how is ours, the what belongs to everyone. Lydia blinked. You mean, we'll give away the performance curves? With tolerances. With warnings. With humility. It's the difference between a map and a motor. Mom didn't believe in secrets that save lives. She looked at the notebooks, then at the door, as if expecting Evan to walk in with a different kind of argument. No one came. Do it, she said. I signed my name as chair of the Harbor Trust, 1 stroke for every year Margaret and I learned to share a life. Patel signed technical stewardship. Kevin signed community. Lydia didn't sign anything. Not yet. She'd earn ink the long way. On March 1st, we wheeled a tripod into the lab, pointed a cheap camera at a white wall, and pressed record. Lydia stood centered, no makeup, hair pulled back, hands steady. She didn't read. She spoke. My name is Lydia. Last year, I inherited money and used it like a weapon. I told my father to disappear. He did, but he took something sacred, my mother's work, and he kept it safe from me. I am here to say he was right. Haven belongs to the many, not the few. If you saved the clip of me at some gala, delete it. Use this one instead. She paused, eyes bright. If you've ever loved someone brilliant and tried to be worthy of them after failing them. I'm trying now. We posted the 3-minute video with the performance curves and the covenant. No music. No brands. Just a daughter choosing the second kind of love. By dusk, emails blinked from school boards, church groups, a public works chief in Idaho, and a housing nonprofit in Cleveland that asked the most beautiful question of the week: can our teenagers build this with supervision? Maybe. If we taught them well. If we licensed fairly. If we kept the covenant. The lake behind the cabin was still a mirror of ice. The river below the lab was moving, though, dark, loud, certain. Somewhere under St. Paul, a thaw had begun. I stood in room 214 after everyone left, lights fluorescing just enough to make the shield shine. I placed my palm on the polycarbonate. The hum met my bones like an old friend. I disappeared, I whispered to the empty room. But I took the future with me. And now, very quietly, we were bringing it back. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it arrived like forgiveness, slow, steady, impossible to ignore. The snow receded from the fields, the river broke open, and the air smelled faintly of wet soil and renewal. Haven was no longer a secret. It was a seed that had taken root in a world that desperately needed one. By April, small workshops from Wisconsin to New Mexico were building their own versions under our open specs. Each one followed the covenant: affordable, sustainable, accountable. The blueprints we'd shared became the foundation for dozens of local projects: a co-op in Flagstaff powering an orphanage, a retired mechanic in Ohio heating homes for veterans, a group of high school students in Maine building a mini generator for their science fair. Sometimes, late at night, I'd scroll through photos people sent us, the faint glow of the devices in barns, cabins, and classrooms. Margaret's handwriting was still visible on the circuit boards, etched into the design like a signature across time. Every unit was a fragment of her brilliance carried forward by new hands. Lydia had become the quiet architect behind the chaos. She managed emails, reviewed safety reports, mentored students. She never once used her title. She didn't need to. The work was her penance, and in it, she found her peace. One evening, after the last of the day's messages were answered, she stood by the window of the cabin, watching the sunset spill across the bay. "You know," she said softly, "Mom always told me the hardest part of creation isn't starting, it's letting it go." She was right, I said. But she never really let go. She just passed the torch. Lydia smiled faintly. "Maybe now we both get to carry it." A month later, the foundation hosted its first open forum in St. Paul. Scientists, craftsmen, students, all under one roof, all speaking the same language of purpose. No red carpets, no shareholders, no corporate banners. Just people, tools, and ideas. When I stood at the podium to give the closing remarks, I looked out at the faces, bright, curious, alive, and felt something click into place inside me. For the first time in years, the silence Margaret left behind didn't feel heavy. It felt full. I spoke simply. My wife believed that progress without compassion is just machinery. And that the hands that build must never forget the hearts they serve. Haven wasn't meant to make us rich. It was meant to make us responsible. The audience was quiet for a long moment, then rose in applause. Somewhere in that sound, I could almost hear Margaret laughing, that quick, sharp, unstoppable laugh that used to fill every corner of our home. After the event, I walked alone to the river. The city lights shimmered on the water like scattered stars. I took a small pendant from my pocket, the same glass ornament Lydia had hung on our Christmas tree, and tossed it gently into the current. It sank with a flash of blue light before vanishing beneath the ripples. "That's for you, Ellie," I murmured. "Your fire's still burning." Behind me, the foundation building glowed through the mist, not like a monument, but like a workshop, alive and breathing. Inside, young people were still talking, sketching, dreaming. And I knew then that I hadn't disappeared at all. I had simply stepped aside to let the next generation see the light. The world didn't need another man clutching what was lost. It needed builders, the kind who could turn grief into motion and memory into change. I looked up at the stars, smiled, and whispered the words that had carried me through every loss and every rebirth. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you set in motion. And with that, I turned toward the workshop's warm light, the sound of laughter, invention, and life, and walked home.